Thank you for coming. I see familiar faces. I have a student here. I have my editor walking in, my mom and my sister. So the description for this talk is to talk about Curtis Iaukea memories of some of the court cases after the illegal overthrow in 1893. And I realized that I actually have to read his words in order to share their memories. So please bear with me as I go through some of the memories from his diary notes and the bill of complaint and other sources. I'm reading from my first book, this is The Queen and I. And okay, so that should be better. So we're not going to talk loud.
More.
Okay, I can improvise. Okay, so I'm reading from my first book, The Queen and I, a story of dispossessions and reconnections in Hawaii. And it's based on the memories of Curtis Iaukea, who was the advisor to the Queen, one of the first trustees to her estate, giving power of attorney over her towards the end of her life. And I'm going to start actually with his memory of Queen Victoria's Golden Jubilee and his voyage to London for that. And then I'll get into the court cases. His memories cover a tumultuous time in our history, the early territorial era, when Hawaiian Kingdom subjects and the national terrain were undergoing massive changes forced by the American legal and political system. And Queen Liliʻuokalani was at the center of this attack up to her death on November 11, 1917. What happened to her and her land is representative of all our dealings with Aina and Ohana. Curtis was writing his own book, and these are the manuscripts that I included here in my book. He wrote about the Hawaiian Homes Commission Act of 1921, the Crown Lands Revenue case in Washington, D.C. in 1909, the forming of the Queen's Trust Deed in 1909, the bill of complaint by Prince Kuhio against the Queen in an attempt to break this trust deed in 1915, what I call the Insanity Trials, and the Waikiki Reclamation Act in 1928. So pretty intense. There's a lot that our narratives don't talk about today. The illegal overthrow was really in a lot of aspects just the beginning of what some of my students say as a lot of stress, like a lot of stress for the Queen up until her death. The properties at the center of these court cases included the Lele, which is the 8 acres that was granted to Maikupuna in Waikiki, Washington Place, her private home, and Aliʻiōlani, the Queen's residence in Waikiki. So before I get into all of that, just a little bit about his trip to London. He did a radio broadcast in 1937, and it was 50 years past when he had attended Queen Kamehameha and Liliʻuokalani in London. And the archives just got the recording of that radio broadcast, so we just heard it for the first time, my mother, my sister, myself, a couple months ago. So we heard his voice for the first time, which was amazing. But he said, "As our announcer has told you, I promise to relate some of the colorful and interesting things about 2 Jubilee celebrations of Her Majesty, Queen Victoria, the great-grandmother of the Duke of York, soon to be crowned King of England. I first had the honor of representing my country at the Court of St. James in 1883. Hawaii was an independent kingdom with its own sovereign government and royal family, its own elaborate and ritualistic court life, modeled after that of England. On the occasion of this visit, I had returned from the pleasant duty of representing Hawaii at the coronation of Tsar Nicholas of Russia, father of the last royal ruler of that country. A delightful experience on the same mission was when an informal audience was granted me by the Prince of Wales. My second visit to the court of St. James was on the occasion of Queen Victoria's Golden Jubilee in 1887. I accompanied Queen Liliʻuokalani, consort of King Kalakaua, in the capacity of court chamberlain. Also in our party was the Princess Liliʻuokalani, then heir apparent, and later Queen of Hawaii. So skipping to their meeting, Her Majesty was seated on a sofa. This, with 2 chairs, comprised the only furniture in the room. In attendance on Her Majesty were the Royal Highnesses, the Duke of Connaught, and the Prince and Princess of Battenberg. As the Hawaiian Queen entered the room, Queen Victoria rose and graciously taking the visitor's hands in hers, kissed her on both cheeks. The Princess Liliʻuokalani was greeted with affection. Her Majesty Victoria kissing her on her forehead. The conversation between the 2 queens was friendly and animated. I acted as an interpreter for Kamehameha as she did not speak English. The visit of King Kalakaua to England some years previous was recalled with much pleasure by Queen Victoria, who spoke of him with warm friendliness. After some minutes of general conversation, we took our leave. We of Hawaii felt very close to the British people on this historic occasion, for the friendship of the 2 people dates back to 1847, when England was the first world power to recognize Hawaii as a sister nation and to guarantee the independence of the Hawaiian Kingdom. And so on behalf of the people of Hawaii, I respectfully extend to their Majesties, King George and Queen Elizabeth, hearty greetings and the best wishes for a long, peaceful reign. Long live the King. So my Puna's words that I found cover the whole spectrum of court life and really grand in some aspects, and then also really emotional in other aspects. But the memory, as I was researching, the memories led me to the court cases. And then the information just started really coming. So the first memory was talking about the property of the lele of Honolulu that was left to him in the Queen's trustee. And herein begins the narrative. Speaking of the tract of land in question, Queen Liliʻuokalani devised to me known as the lele of Honolulu, situate at Waikiki Waina, a quarter of a mile away from the main tract known as the Ili of Honolulu. It contains some 7 acres, a little more or less, rice land and under lease at $200 a year rental. I did not come into possession of this land until 8 years had passed with the Queen's death in September of 1917. And when I did, it was encumbered by a lease to a Mr. H.A. Heen. It wasn't long after I had obtained the fee to the land under the provisions of the trustee when I turned the whole trust over to my wife, who owned in her own right some 15 acres adjoining the lele of Honolulu on the Diamond Head side and next to the fairgrounds. So the title of this chapter that he wrote was titled The Lele of Honolulu and the Attempt to Deprive of It. And when we found this mention of the lele of Honolulu, it set us on a search for the land and wanting to know what happened to it because we never heard of it. Not only the lele, but my great-great-grandmother's land too. So today it's most of Date Street. What happens to land also happens to us. And when you change the landscape, you change the peoplescape. And dispossession is a real thing, as it affects the psyche as much as it affects the physical loss of not having it. And land is emotional here, not only because it is, not only because of our direct mo'oku'auhau back to the source, but it's emotional, especially when you don't have it. So how do you connect to Aina if you don't have any, was one of my questions when I started researching. And it was actually one of my main questions. And then I found the other narratives that really got into the Queen's lands, her private lands, and also the Crown lands. And I noticed the emotion surrounding all of it. In my book, I write about it as a heartbreak, And I think it still underlines a lot of our interactions today because it hasn't been fully healed. So in 1909, Queen Liliʻuokalani filed Liliʻuokalani versus the United States of America, in the U.S. Court of Claims to fight for the revenue from the Crown lands. And let me just find it. Prior to that, in 1898, the Queen lodged a protest in Washington, D.C. for the return of the Crown lands and the revenue. And she wrote, I, Liʻiōkalani of Hawaii, named heir apparent on the 10th day of April, 1877, and proclaimed Queen of the Hawaiian Islands on the 29th day of January, 1891, do hereby protest against the assertion of ownership by the United States of America of the so-called Hawaiian Crown lands, amounting to about 1 million acres, and which are my property, and I especially protest against such assertion of ownership as taking a private property without due process of law, and without just or other compensation. So that was in 1898, and then in 1909, when she filed her bill of complaint, it said that under and by virtue of said last mentioned act, said Crown lands was rendered inalienable, and all the rents profits derived from the said lands, after deducting the necessary and proper expenses, were declared to be for the use and benefit of the reigning sovereign. So in 1909, I believe it's November, she files her this appeal for the Crown lands in the U.S. Court of Claims, and then a couple weeks later, she also files her trust deed, and it gets tricky because Prince Pujio is the congressional representative, and he also wanted 2 pieces of private property from the Queen in fee simple, which she didn't want to give him. Aliʻiōlani in Waikiki, and Washington Place, her home. And so, back to their words as I talk about this. He then, because she didn't want to give it to him in fee simple, he then filed, and I'm not a lawyer, so I just keep that in mind. I'm reading all these court cases, but it's a bill of complaint. So the best I can make of it was that it's a charge to break the trust in order to become what's known as her next of friend, because he's her relative, to take control of the trust and break it from the trustees. So it becomes a fight between him and the trustees, with the Queen saying that she doesn't approve of the fight. Sorry. Okay, so Curtis writes about this. To make a long story short, the issue was fought but in the courts, the trustees coming out of the smoke and fray with flying colors. Anyone so inclined can find the full proceedings in the circuit court records. And this was when the documents really did start talking to us. So they're leading us to the circuit court records, where there's over 1,000 pages of information about this bill of complaint. In this connection, it might be interesting to note that the bone of contention, insofar as the contestants were concerned, centered in Washington Place and Aliʻiōlani, the beach residence at Waikiki, which the Queen, under her deed of trust, had bequeathed to John Aimoku and Joseph Kaipo Aea, respectively. They, having been brought up and reared by the Queen as members of the family and treated as such of the Queen's deed of trust of December 2nd, 1909. So wanting to set aside the deed of trust, like I said, the Prince entered the bill of complaint as her next of friend. And throughout this, the attempt was to, why I think of them as the insanity trials, was because it attempted to question her mental capacity in order to break her trust. So it was an attack on her mental well-being. I have like 3 more things to read. So, and really it's hard to choose which ones to read because there's so much information. Okay, so the bill of complaint said that the Queen had been unaccustomed to attend to her own business, and that owing to her official position, her physical infirmities, the necessary result of age and illness, she had led a life of seclusion and retirement, seeing only from time to time her intimate friends and relatives, and taking no active part in the details of her own affairs, and that the said Queen had no recollection of the service upon her of said process, and that the Queen's mind was further affected and shaken. She responds with what's called a discontinuance, motion to dismiss, and assertion of her mental competency. And so she says she hereby moves that the said bill of complaint herein filed should be terminated and dismissed on the ground that it was instituted without her authority, consent, or knowledge, and it is being maintained without her authority or consent, that it has not at any time been ratified by this movement, and that she disapproves of its institution and does not desire it to be maintenance, but on the contrary, desires it to be terminated and dismissed. And she follows with what's called an assertion of mental competency. And all of this, the said Liliʻuokalani is ready to prove and asks an opportunity to prove without waiving her claim that the burden is not on her to prove her sanity or mental competency, but on anyone who alleges that she is insane or mentally incompetent to prove the said alleged insanity or mental incompetency. She then told Curtis Iaukea, "Pa'amai oko," and this is from his diary notes. "Pa'amai oko," which interprets means "you hold on." The Queen made this remark to me just as I was leaving the main house to return to my office. I immediately turned around and said, "Yes, Your Majesty, your trustees will stand by you in your deed of trust." We had been discussing for a half hour or more Kalaneʻanaʻole's claim for a deed to the Queen's Waikiki residence and his proposed suit to set aside the deed of trust. Her Majesty had repeatedly made the remark, "Why do they want to get my property for? Kalakaua and Kapiolani never left me any of their property. Why should they have mine?" Pa'amai oko, hold the trust, was her directive to her trustees, just like holding ground. So when I think of it, I put it into a surfing analogy. Because that's where I find my place in the ocean. And I love listening to Jerry Lopez, who's a well-known surfer, and Yogi, actually, speak about holding your breath. So he talks about finding your breath in a closeout set. In this situation, when you're stuck inside while surfing and the waves keep coming and closing out around you, he says you have three choices. First, do nothing and get tossed around. Second, panic. Or third, hold your ground and you'll be in a good position when the set ends. He says that being caught inside during a big set teaches us how to breathe correctly and most effectively so that we can concentrate our prana or mana to open the gateway to our inner self. And after it passes, you learn something you didn't know before. I heard him speak recently in February actually about, and he added on that he had an outer body experience when he was knocked out while surfing. And he was looking down at his body as it was being tossed around. And I had a similar experience while surfing 2 years ago. And the idea that you can save yourself when you need to came to mind when I heard him talking about it, but also the power of having that, knowing when to contract that space, hold the breath, and then so that you can breathe ultimately. So when I think about the documents, for me, they've been holding the ground to a certain degree. Like, I always think of the archives as right? But the Iaukea collection was, it was a private collection that wasn't open to the public until maybe recently, I'm not sure if it is yet. But we were given access. And so when I think of the documents, I thought they were like just holding their breath underground, waiting for somebody to find them. I think it's really on the second floor where they keep the undocumented collections. So part of like my mission, I guess you could say, or what became why I wanted to keep looking was to bring them out into the air, have them breathe, and that interaction in turn breeds us. Because then we know more about who we were based on who we were, who we are based on who we were. And if we have misinformation, then there's no way to know. We just know someone's discourse or tinge on who we might have been. So regardless of how intense the documents are, and they really are, for me, it was really thinking of bringing them out so they could breathe, so that they could go from this compact to this expansive interaction, and like I said, in turn breathe myself and us. And because there are so many documents that are still awaiting the light, even if they're on the second floor, they want to see the light. And part of our kuleana is to bring them out into the light and have them breathe, because it feels in our own knowing and identity. And it is their stories. So my job is not to censor their stories, and it is still my interpretation of their stories. So it's open for all of our interpretations. Okay, so after the Queen passed in 1917, the insanity trials ended with the territory condemning Washington Place and using it to house the territorial governors up until today. She wanted it to go to John Aimoku Dominus instead. That didn't happen. The Kealoheilani land was granted to Prince Kuhio in fee simple instead of a life estate, which she did not want to happen. But it was transferred to him after her death. After the prince passed, his wife donated the land to the territory, and today it's known as Kuhio Beach. The Crown Lands Revenue case did not come out in her favor in the U.S. Court of Claims because they attached it to the office instead of the sovereign. And the Lele of Hamohamo was condemned by the territory for the building of the Alawai Canal. Some of it was sold off in bits and pieces, known as the Hamohamo tract, with the rest of it sold off by my family, but without our knowledge. And in each case, land was reimagined and rearticulated by the territorial government. So Crown lands and government lands were reconfigured as public lands, native tenants as native Hawaiians, lo'i and duck ponds were articulated as swamplands and then built up as contemporary Waikiki. And Kealoheilani went from Kealoheilani to Puʻelelani to Kuhio Beach. The attacks on the Queen on her national and personal properties were meant to further distance her from Hawaiians and our epistemology, one that sees the interconnection and her place within that interconnection as mo'i, as vital. It was meant to make the continuity that she represented and still represents for many suspect and illegitimate. But I write, land, body, memory all inform one another. For Hawaiians in the past, vital information was relayed through the environment. And this memory of ka'aina affected close interpersonal relationships and societal structures. I asked the question, when and how did this disconnect occur between land, body, memory for many Hawaiians? When did it occur for my own family? Both occurred gradually over time, and today the connect and disconnect are written into the same hereditary code. However, regardless of all that has occurred and continues to happen to foster this disconnect, Hawaiians and our thought practices have survived, remaining inseparable at the source. As others have proclaimed, we are still here, and our genetic makeup still consists of interwoven understandings of land, body, and emotion. Assuming a separation between the three arises from a larger insanity that would see these entities and many others as separate and distinct. Ali'i, Ka'aina, and Kanaka Maoli are all links in a single genealogical chain. That is why what happened to Queen Liliʻuokalani's personal and mental property is representative of all of our dealings with ohana and aina. The heart really does ache, and understanding how these events occurred and how we are still affected begins the process of putting the pieces back together. And the political undeniable need to be on the land itself again must occur to actually heal the break. And I suppose I also came to understand that personal, private property would be nice, but it really is about the connection. My identity is not limited to one parcel of land, and it's deeper than that. So I suppose ultimately, that was one of my lessons in going through why not us, where's our land? That whole, like, where is it? Sort of coming out the other end, recognizing that that land is a subdivision today and part of the Hawaii Canal, but the other land, the land is still there, the ocean is still there for us to connect and reconnect continuously. I think I'll end there for now, and then I can take questions if people have any thoughts, comments. Thank you. They were mostly all in English.
Curtis Piehu Iaukea for representative to the U.S. Congress?
I think it was, I thought it was a home rule party. Yeah. What's interesting about that, though, he was given power of attorney over the Queen at the end of her life, but he was also present at Prince Ku'io's funeral, which was in 1921, not too long after. So I know, like, with my own situation, with our family stuff, it can be extremely complicated. So even as they're fighting things in the courts, there's other things going on. And the complication is okay. Like, I don't think we needed to be neatly packed because that's what they were going through under U.S. occupation. So as we go through similar things today, it's part of that ties back to unsettlement with the land base itself.
Thank you for presenting today and sharing. My question is specifically for the use of archives. Example of your book, family story. How are others, or if you could give examples of how these archives, to my understanding, are some of the, if not the largest archival information for Indigenous society in the world, written anyway. Examples of how other groups or families are utilizing these archives today, how it's relevant moving forward.
And really the only reason I started going to the archives was because someone at a party at Hawaiian Studies told me to research my last name. So that was literally, and I still see him around sometimes today. And literally, and I thought of him over the years, like, why did I listen to him? But literally, I think we're just in there, and you can find so much information just by wanting to know about yourself in certain aspects in your ohana. So there's always, I mean, I think our archives are highly populated with people. They're for different reasons. But it's always good to know, like, what does it mean? And also, the archives holds all the government information from the territory. So Curtis Iaukea was on the board of the archives when it first opened. So a lot of that information was put there probably by him, and then later on. Archives is a trip. I don't know. There's so much going on there.
So could you talk a little bit more about your feelings when, so I was happy to hear that anecdote that somebody said, why don't you investigate the last name? What was your experience there when you first went there, and how did you get the idea about doing further research and ultimately this book?
So you want to know about the crying and...
I'm kind of interested in that.
I just remember us finding the Liliʻuokalani information and making an appointment with the trustees of the Queen Liliʻuokalani Trust and asking, where's the land today? And they gave us a meeting because our kupuna was one of the first trustees. I think it ran the whole gamut. And even when I reread this book today, and I haven't talked about it really out for kind of a while now. I'm just struck by how emotional it really was to go through all that information, find out things about the Queen and Prince Kuhio, and try and just stand in that information and even want to write about it. And at some points I felt like I was being led to like, include this, don't include that, include this, don't include that. So for me it opened up how to read Hoʻailona or the signs and take notice of what I should talk about, it's not that I shouldn't, but like there's so many layers to it. And what would be good to bring out and what wouldn't, for whatever reasons. And then I really did get a push to get all the information out when other people started picking up on the information. And there's a whole thing about that as well. So it's funny how like I felt like I didn't push through it, because really I didn't think I would go to graduate school ever, or even beyond. So it's, I don't know.
I want to say that ever since I read your book, I have not been able to drive down Date Street without thinking of your family.
Yes.
Okay, in the condemnation of Washington Place,
Yes.
did you find any information where Ms. Kuhio was involved in that? I mean, he clearly got...
So the Queen passed in 1917 and the bill of complaint was settled in 1918. So her trustees came to an agreement with Prince Kuhio and his wife. My kupuna writes about it as through a dream. They had a dream that it should end. And so it ended. And then I did have questions about why did then they not deed the properties how she had written, and I don't know. So Washington Place is interesting though, because it is her, as we know, her beloved home. And she wanted Hawaiian music and language taught to keiki there. And among other things, there were a whole different groups of ideas about what to do with that space. The fact that the territory condemned it and the governors lived there, for me, is the ultimate, and I've said it before, it's like the ultimate slap in the face to have that occupied. It's a real physical occupation of her personal space. So I feel that whenever I'm around Washington Place, it's just the one, you know.
Regarding Washington Place, John Ihoe died in July. Iaukea died in November. The trust, he is the only, of all her property, his right to Washington Place went to his children as well. For everybody else, it was a life estate. So when you died, the property reverts to the trust. So his kids had the right to live there. They were minors at the time. And apparently the trustees decided to allow the territory to condemn the property and purchase it for Washington Place. I believe personally that if it had stayed in the if you feel like, yeah, how dare the government use it, we ought to be grateful that they use it, and the first ladies all were supporting the silver course and wanted to renew the queen, because any one of the first ladies during the territorial period, this is a old crappy house, I want to turn down, I want something new, and then we wouldn't have anything. So I think, in a way, although it costs us, the taxpayers, a lot of money to maintain it and keep it, the memory is still there.
It's hard. It is hard to know what would have happened, like everything else. I still just get a twinge when I'm around it or think about it.
She's still there. I volunteer there, so you kind of feel the presence.
That's awesome.
Thanks, just, I'm curious, that right now, there's another fight going over, around the state of, and as many, that just struck me, it's going to be talking, remembering about the intentional challenge for the capacity, and I wonder if there's been anything thinking about those paradigms in this, what's happening now.
Literally, I just got chicken skin when you started talking about that because, and you know what I was thinking about tonight, just even talking about it. I don't know anything that's going on with that except for what we see on the news.
It's her birthday today.
Oh,
It's the princess's birthday.
oh wow.
You can talk about it.
I just personally feel bad for the situation. I mean, I really feel for her without knowing anything. Like it almost brings tears to my eyes to think of it happening again, regardless of what all the arguments are. And again, I don't know anything other than what we hear. But to see that happen, and part of that I read about is the female, like trying to prove the female insane. So I asked the question, would this happen with the male monarch? Would they try to prove him insane? And of course, we don't have an answer, but it just, to see the female, the Manawahine, being put on the stage and talked about and written about and discussed as if they're almost as if she's not there, right, without a voice. And of course, they both have strong voices. So I didn't know it was her birthday, but I really do feel for that situation.
Thank
you.
I was just wondering, this long extended court cases and proceedings, who were the Queen's allies?
So that was her constant question, who's her allies? And so it went back and forward as far as, so even with the trustee, she revoked the trust a number of times because she didn't trust her trustees. And then she ended up trusting them for the most part. So that was her constant worry. Who's with her, who's not with her. Yes. That's a good question. Thank you. I wrote a second book about Keka'a, which is a space on Maui, and the landscape, and pioneer mill, and sugar, and all of that. And then I've been writing things about Maui, as far as how changing the land changes the people, and our rights to our spaces on the land and in the ocean. I'm not sure where I'm going to go next. I'm open to suggestions.
When the Queen filed like her court challenges or what have you, did she have legal representation? Did she have attorneys?
She did. W.O. Smith was one of her attorneys, who was also one of the ones that overthrew her. So, and then Judge Humphreys, she wanted him to be the attorney, but he wanted to remain neutral, but say that she was sane. So I feel like she had a bunch of legal advice around her. I think all parties did. And that's part of like what surprised me in the documents was how well they knew the law. Yes.
Just following up on that, the biggest problem she had when she was trying to be in the federal courts was that the people representing her had been involved in her overthrow. So as a result, the most compelling argument that they could make for why she should retain her property was the illegality of what her own representatives had done. So that stayed off the table when she made the argument. So ultimately, federally, they were arguing, this stuff happened. She used to have a lot of stuff. How about you just give her some of it back? But with no context in terms of why and under what circumstances she'd been alienated from the land, because the people representing her were actually some of the people who had done it.
So do you have any insight into why Kuhio filed a complaint against her trust? I mean, other than that, I would think that they're nice properties and, you know.
So for the two pieces of property, but also maybe